We're a few minutes late, so I think let's crack on with this final session. But just by way of introduction to this session, I just wanted to say that I work for the Lone Workers Alliance, and my role there is looking at short supply chains and local food systems. And a couple of weeks ago, I organised a conference which really pulled together a whole range of stakeholders: farmers, growers, food businesses, politicians, stakeholders. And I think I won't go into exactly the conclusions, but at the end, I think we all came away with the feeling that actually there was an enormous potential for local food systems and short supply chains to really grow. Certainly over the last 30 years, I think we've had some really excellent examples of food models that have really grown and really been successful. Local food systems were tested absolutely during COVID, and I know there were issues, but I think really they came out with flying colours in terms of resilience. There was also, I think, a feeling that if we came together as a group of organisations involved in producing, processing and distributing local short supply chain systems, there was actually enormous potential for us to scale up and make a real difference. And I'm quite excited by that. And I think our closing speaker, Chris Smaje, probably knows more about this than anybody else. So I'm delighted that he's here with us to close the conference. Chris, I think, is a man of many roles. I think he's a farmer and grower, a sociologist, and an author. So he's been writing regular blogs, which I'm sure most people in this room will be familiar with. He's recently published a book by Chelsea Green, which we will hear more about it. So, Chris, I'll hand over the floor to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Well, it's a real honour to be invited to close the proceedings for the day. Despite that fulsome introduction, I've got to tell you, I've got a slight element of imposter syndrome in that I was a full-time commercial grower on a very small scale. I did that for about 5 years. Set up a small local veg box scheme, Vallis Veg, which I'm happy to say is still going. And I'll say a little bit more about that towards the end of the talk. But I've sort of drifted away from a sort of hands-on role in that. Setting it up actually in many ways was some of the best 5 years of my life, but also very challenging 5 years. And I sort of got drawn back a little bit to the desk and back to the sociology, trying to figure out, why is it so challenging? Why is it so hard to produce good, healthy, local food? So as a result of this kind of pencil sucking process, I published this book a couple of years ago, A Small Farm Future, and don't have time to go through its arguments in detail, but basically I think whether we like it or not, the future for the world, the future for humanity long term is going to be small scale, local, diverse, low energy, job rich agriculture or horticulture, and that can be a good future or it can be not such a good future. It's going to happen anyway, so the responsibility on all of us, but particularly people in the horticulture sector, is to try and make it a good future. That isn't the reality at present. This is a photo. I was told not to use any photos in this talk that were potentially copyright, so unfortunately I'm inflicting on you my slightly iffy amateur photos that I've taken on my phone. But anyway, this is a field very close to my holding, 50-acre field, ploughed every year, almost always grows wheat, not very diverse, not very job rich, quite energy intensive. And so this is the reality pretty much of global farming, really. If you look at this pie chart, this is global cropland use. So about 700 million hectares globally are devoted just to the 4 big crops: wheat, maize, rice and soy. The next 6 largest crops occupy another 20%. Most of those 6 are other cereals and grain, legumes. Everything else about a quarter, and fresh veg only about 5%. Here in the UK, even less than that, about 3%. And this hasn't arisen, this isn't sort of some natural human ecology that's driving this. It's very much modern politics and economics that are driving it. I'd recommend this book. Well, obviously I'd recommend my book, but I'd also recommend this recent book by Glenn Davis Stone, The Agricultural Dilemma, How Not to Feed the World, as a really good, succinct account of how we've got to that kind of, we're sort of building our global civilization on such a narrow agrarian base. And his argument, basically, I would summarize as saying that we're overproducing too few a number of crops in too larger quantities that we don't need to solve supposed problems that we don't really have, involving the transfer of public money that we can't really afford, to subsidize corporations that we don't really need to exist, and in the process giving us illnesses that we shouldn't really be having. So hopefully, well, the situation will change. Hopefully it will change from that. In my book, the first part of the book, I talk about 10 crises that I think are driving change away from that kind of heavily concentrated system. Climate change is one, probably the biggest one, most important one. In the agriculture and horticulture sector, we tend to talk about things like soil, biodiversity, water issues, but really I'd direct your attention to the sort of top right of the diagram. I think energy is going to be a huge issue. Obviously, we're talking about it very much now in the context of Ukraine and so on, but I think basically the days of cheap, abundant fossil energy are over, and that is going to drive an enormous amount of change. I mean, I think most people, and certainly most governments, I don't think are remotely alive to the enormity of the changes that are going to be happening in the coming decades. And high energy prices, this isn't just a short-term supply issue. I think this is a chronic issue that's going to change the way that we live in fundamental ways. Likewise, political economy. I mean, the world is awash in a sea of cheap but unstable capital. That's not something that we can rely on long term. And that, as we're already seeing in the UK and many other countries, that's having politically destabilizing effects and will change the nature of economic production in all sorts of ways. And that's going to feed into the need to create very different cultures, very different economic cultures, and certainly very different food cultures. So I sort of drew this diagram. I mean, I think we're in for turbulent times. I drew the diagram to suggest that every cloud has a silver lining. I'm not so sure in some of these cases. I think we're in for a rough ride, but certainly focusing on local, diverse production of food for local needs is one of our best options for addressing that. Again, sort of drawing from my phone, my dodgy back catalogue of photos from my phone. This is a trip I took, a kind of study tour a few years ago to Nicaragua, just to illustrate that. I thought, since we're heading into the British winter, I thought I'd probe at your envy by showing this small holding where it's too hot there to grow citrus trees out in the open. So you have to grow them under the shade of coconut palms. And it's a kind of small scale system, small holdings, people living and working the land, job rich, low energy, producing food and fiber for local needs. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you try that particular system here in the UK, but I mean, obviously it's a simple example of multi-cropping and making horticulture job rich, making people be creative about how to coax productivity out of the system for local needs using low energy nutrient cycling methods is going to be the name of the game. I thought I'd just show you this slide. This is a crop from the Americas, obviously, from that part of the world that we can grow here in the UK. And I thought I'd just show you this because I guarantee you pretty much any day of the week you can pick up a newspaper and it will have an article that says, surprisingly, it turns out that local organically produced food is not the most sustainable. It turns out, and I always think, it's going to say Spanish tomatoes. It's going to say Spanish tomatoes. Invariably, it does. It turns out that Spanish tomatoes have a lower carbon footprint than ones grown in the UK using fossil heat in tunnels. I think to this audience, you don't need me to explain some of the problems with that line of argument. But in my book, I talk about what I call the dangers of the ethics of the food aisle. You know, the whole way that we construct these kinds of measures and comparisons is based on kind of conventional existing assumptions about the global food production system and the systems of routes to market globally, and sort of comparing products in the supermarket aisle in terms of quite narrowly framed measures and of carbon intensity or whatever it might be. There's many reasons why that kind of tomato comparison doesn't really work, particularly for small scale local growers like us. But obviously the example does draw our attention to inputs. It's important to be aware of that. But we need to go beyond these shopping aisle ethics and start developing local food cultures. And I mean, one of my arguments in my book is that we really need as citizens to be more aware of our food systems, to be aware of where our food is coming from, to make our local places be productive of food. And in that way, we can see the consequences, we can see the ecological consequences of our actions, rather than a kind of global commoditized food systems where we've got no idea what the social conditions or the ecological conditions of production are in distant parts of the world. So moving away from that kind of producers and consumers model to growers and eaters. Of course, it's easy to say that in theory. It's difficult as local growers to realize that it's difficult for us to compete at market prices as small scale local or organic growers. It's hard for our prices to be competitive. I just very simply illustrating the components of food price. I think what we're going to see long term in the future is that the things that make small scale growing difficult are in that kind of the bottom row. Land and labour are excessively high, whereas energy, material inputs, fertility inputs, the price that we pay, or more to the point, don't pay for pollution and carbon emissions, the price of capital, are all very low. I think the long-term trend is for that block at the top. Those prices are going to increase. The prices in the bottom row are going to decrease. So long-term, I think it's going to be a more propitious environment for small-scale, local, diverse horticultural production. That doesn't make it easy in the short term. It's not the kind of sector where early entrants derive a great benefit. And as I said, I think there's going to be enormous turbulence as part of that process. I thought I'd just, I'll wind up soon, but I thought I'd just show you a bit of local colour. I'm just trying, there it is. It's kind of weird looking at it from here. I was trying to see where my holding is. So we were just talking about peri-urban agriculture in the previous session. So this is the town of Frome, where I live. My holding is that little pizza slice shaped bit of land in the top left corner. That's it, homing in on it a little bit more. So this was the land as it was when my wife and I bought it in 2003. That is a drone shot we took of it a couple of years ago. So you can see we've diversified it quite considerably. I never really like to present my own holding as any kind of exemplar of the way that we should farm or grow. I don't really consider myself an expert grower. A lot of it has been seat of the pants kind of stuff. What I would say though is that because of the global economy of cheap, abundant energy, essentially, we've kind of sort of disentangled the need to produce food and fiber locally and spread it around the world, so that places just specialize in the one competitive crop that they can produce the most easily. So sort of what we've tried to do on our holding is produce crops more intensively. So we're now we're now running the veg box scheme that I mentioned. We're producing, we still have some grassland, we're producing wood. And so we need to sort of think about all of these different things together locally. And also we have a lot of people living on the site as well. So always including people into the picture. So as I said, one thing we do still is grow vegetables, a little local veg box scheme, and the food hub that Bea was mentioning earlier that we sell into. I spend a lot of my time now pottering around, sort of trying to be my own arable farmer. This feels like the appropriate scale to me to be growing cereals. So I can just about manage to sharpen a sickle as opposed to servicing a tractor. Oh, I was going to say one thing we've done with our veg box scheme in the last year is start delivering with an electric trike, which has worked really well. But again, one of the problems as a new entrant is there's not a lot of trike mechanics around. So I've had to learn how to actually I had to learn to ride it as well, which is harder than you might think. But anyway, so I think pottering around with these sort of small to middle scale technologies is sort of what I spend my time doing when I'm not in the study these days. But the real focus of our place is not really on intensifying production or maximizing income. It's kind of about local human connection, and that's what I would urge all of you, involved in the as commercial growers. We've got to make our businesses stack up. They've got to wash their faces. But the real big issue going forward is going to be producing food and fiber and producing for local needs. So we were just talking about this in the previous session. It's really interesting to hear other people's experiences. We've got a 2-year kind of apprenticeship scheme that we're running. So Chris, you can see all the apprentices much younger and stronger and full of energy compared to me. But yeah, Chris and Ellis on the right, who were with us for a couple of years now, working on a larger holding. Ellie, who's market garden manager this year. And we've struggled. We've sort of tried to develop a model that kind of honours our own work in setting up the whole thing and doing it over quite a number of years, but also within the limited financial wriggle room that you get in this sector, kind of honouring the work of people coming through. So we are currently advertising for 2-year learning opportunity. So the idea is that people come essentially as an apprentice in the first year, learn the ropes, and then we kind of essentially lend them the business in the second year. Because one thing we've identified is that people often have quite good technical growing skills, but actually the business side of running a small box scheme is something that people are less familiar with. So we kind of lend them the business and sort of make it available to them in a sort of slightly less daunting way than starting one from scratch, but really trying to give them as much leeway to make their own decisions and push things forward as possible. And that's worked reasonably well. We're sort of in early days of it, but we're advertising for our next intake at the moment. So that's one aspect of it. And I just generally wanted to emphasize, it's my sort of shtick for this afternoon, that we've got to make these things stack up, but the longer term outlook is we've got to make food work for communities locally in situations when some of these wider systems are breaking down. So always remember that food ultimately is something that we eat because we need it as human organisms, something to share, something to build community. So this is our weekly farm meal that we have, and it's just a reminder that food is something to be enjoyed, shared. On the right, we have some little allotments that we let local people grow food on our site. This was from some years ago when we were first setting up. The guy in the middle with his wonderful Eco Warrior t-shirt was a local home gardener called Des, and so we set up some sessions where he taught people to basic gardening skills. I used to call it Dig with Des, and then he got very inspired by the writings of Charles Dowding, so it became Don't Dig with Des. But basically just finding, every place is different, every situation is different, but finding ways to sort of reach into and link with the local community. Ultimately, though, I think we need political activism to make local food production and affordable local food available. I got a little bit involved in Extinction Rebellion in a very minor way, sort of going up to these great edifices in London and causing a rumpus. But ultimately, I think the more important rumpus that we need to cause is around affordable housing locally, affordable access to food and access to land for people to be able to farm. So again, with my holding, these fields to the right, to the east, are potentially just about to come on to the market. Someone's sort of looking to turn the greenfield site potentially into volume housing. So you're talking about £10,000 per acre, which is already a steep price for sort of bare agricultural land, is going up to something like £750,000 an acre just for bare development land. And we're getting that whole economic incentive deeply wrong in our society. What I would like to see is more, as I say, not necessarily exactly what we're doing on our holding there, but more agroforestry, more people living and working in the countryside, more genuinely affordable homes, not ones that are just a little bit less than market prices, but genuinely affordable homes. And there's ways we can do that. There's county farms, there's all sorts of wonderful initiatives I've heard about here today, but ultimately that's the kind of bullet that we have to bite in terms of political activism around access to land and access to food and access to housing locally. Anyway, that is just a very quick whiz through. There's a lot more of it in my book here, should you be interested in taking a look. And also, I gather that Chelsea Green, my publisher, are offering a 30% discount for all their books that delegates to this conference can access by using this code and visiting the Chelsea Green website. So some of you probably are keen to get home. I'll stop now, but thanks very much for listening, and thanks for a very informative day.
That's perfect. Thank you, Chris. So we are right. We are coming to the end of the conference. If there are any burning questions, I'll allow one from the audience and one from online. Great. Perfect. In that case, it's a pleasure and my privilege to wrap the day up. I won't go back over and try to pull out main themes of the conference and explore it. I think we've had a really, really wide-ranging event today. We've covered an awful lot of ground, and I think trying to pull out common threads, I think, will probably be an impossible task. What I do want to do is to go back to what I said we were trying to do at the beginning, and that is to pull out some of the key challenges: the cost of living crisis, the biodiversity crisis, the climate crisis, and looking at all the solutions and the contribution that organic horticulture can make to that. And I hope we've really achieved that today. I am always blown away by the incredible knowledge and experience that's within organizations and delegates like this, within the OGA membership and all our collaborating organizations. There is an enormous amount of knowledge, and I thank you for your generosity in sharing that with each other today. So I'm just going to end with a few thank yous. Let me again thank our sponsors. I won't go through naming again, but as I say, without you, I think this event would not have been possible. So thank you. Thank you, as I said, to all our speakers for being so generous with their knowledge and their time. But thank you to our volunteers. So these are the guys who've been running around with roving mics and just making the whole day run really smoothly. Thank you very much indeed. As I say, I think the day would not have gone as smoothly as it has without you. But let me thank the venue for making available this amazing building for us to meet in. But they've also done all of the tech and putting it online and all of the catering. So thank you very much to the Midlands Arts Centre. I think perhaps I'm going to save my biggest thank you to last, and that is thank you to the OGA staff. Putting on conferences like this takes a colossal amount of effort. This is the third Organic Matters conference, and they do it time and time and time again and do an absolutely fantastic job. So please let me thank Phil Sampson, Holly Jarvis, and Lizzie Horton. Thank you, guys. You've done a great job. Take a bow. And finally, also thank you to my fellow directors who have helped put this on, but really thank you to you all for participating today, whether you've been in the room or online. It's been, I think, a really great event. So for those of you here, safe journey home. And for those of you online, thank you for joining us.